Now.
It says recording.
This is live.
Perfect.
Not actually.
It's happening. We're broadcasting.
Hi everybody. Last week Ruth and I drove down to Buffalo, New York to catch one of Derek Webb's house shows. For about 18 years now, Derek Webb has been a really important and influential singer-songwriter to me personally. His older stuff expresses a really cool and resonant Reformed spirituality, a very introspective and rigorous view of the spiritual life. His more recent stuff deals with his deconstruction from the Christian religion and also with his divorce with his wife. His most recent album, which came out in September, last September, is called Fingers Crossed. It is great. I highly recommend that you get it. We got to sit down and talk with Derek Webb about his album Fingers Crossed, about doing house shows, and about his new work coming up hopefully early 2019. We talked about spiritual practices. We talked about the exercise of the introspective mechanisms that rigorous spiritual paths give. And we also talked about that one time where he almost accidentally killed RC Sproul, a prominent Reformed theologian. So, check out the video. Here it is. Go. Look at it. Oh, I have to do that.
Derek Webb, thanks so much
for talking
with me.
I'm so glad to do it.
I've been counting the days since the Grand Rapids thing, because we were there.
How long ago was that?
Was that June?
Was
June
that
9th?
Yeah.
That was awesome, because I don't know anyone else who does house shows.
Oh,
Is that something like, you've been doing that for how long?
A long time. I started playing house shows around my first record, which would have been
2003.
Early 2000s, yeah.
Yeah.
So for a little bit, 15 years maybe.
Yeah, and it's a really cool
on and off,
environment.
I think it's my favorite way to do it, other than maybe in a room like this where we are now.
Like an old school.
So resonant in here.
Yeah.
So it's like things just kind of hang in the air for like ever.
Yeah.
But house shows are great, and they're easy and they're fun and they're super immediate. Do you know what I mean? Like the transference of energy is immediate.
Because it's not like you're relying on your equipment, your auditory sort of
exactly
things. There's
right.
no microphone that makes you more powerful than the audience.
That's right. There's no amps, there's no mics, there's no nothing. And not everybody does house shows that way. I've got pals who bring a little amp and speakers with them and stuff.
Okay.
But I mean, I'm just kind of like, if you're going to do it, do it.
Yeah. If we could actually do this in someone's living room, let's just...
But it feels a little bit like a tight wire without a net. I mean, it's really like, it's whatever's coming out of your actual mouth.
Yeah.
And out of your actual instrument.
Yeah.
And so...
risky and
it's happening
more
right
real.
there. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. At any given time.
It's the most live that live gets.
Yeah, because you can't just turn up the volume if somebody in the audience decides to
No, you can't. And you can't crank the reverb up if you've got a sore throat. Like you gotta push through it and you gotta... So yeah, no, it's great. It's really fun. And this whole year has been almost all house shows. Almost this whole year touring this record, because it felt like house shows were the level of intimacy and vulnerability at a house show.
Yeah.
Because they're so small and they're, like I said, they're so close and immediate and the whole thing, that it felt like the right way to perform, to make a case for the new songs on the new record.
Yeah.
It felt like the right environment. So almost exclusively all the shows on this tour have been house shows all year.
Yeah, because Fingers Crossed it's a very intimate, it's a sad,
it's a heavy and sad record.
I mean, when that first came out, because that came out in September, right?
I think, yeah.
Yeah, so it's just like whenever I really need to scratch that sadness in a deep place,
you're always gonna have that
go
record.
out for a walk with that and just kind of do some mourning.
Yeah. I know.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it was, and it's like, you know, I mean, I probably said it that night. I say it most nights, but like, as an artist, all you have is your source material.
Right, which is your experiences.
All you have is like, you look at the world and you describe it for people. Yeah. And sometimes that process yields joyous, celebratory albums, and sometimes it yields grieving, sad, records like that one.
Yes.
And you can't predict it, and you don't have any real control over it. It's whether or not you show up and do the job honestly or not.
Yeah.
Whether or not you decide to tell the truth or a lie about what you see when you look at the world.
Right.
That's the choice you have.
Yeah.
So it's a sad record.
Yeah, it's a unique record too, because there's not a lot of records that deal with deep spiritual issues from a, what do you want to say, a deconstructed point of view, from the other side.
Right.
Looking, I guess it's kind of a backward-looking record, but it's
also
also forward. I mean, even the title "Fingers Crossed," it's a hopeful sort of thing.
It's true. Yeah. I kind of liked the the reason it wound up being called Fingers Crossed was, I had a few titles, was because there were so many metaphors with that image. Because one is the kind of, I mean, like there's the like you're going to take a jump and you're kind of like, I'm hoping for the best kind of thing.
I hope I won't get destroyed when I hit the ground.
That's exactly right. There's that kind of fingers crossed. There's also in more classical religious iconography, there are a lot of statues where there are saints holding up fingers like this. And in kind of ancient religion, it was seen as a like a crying out to God.
Interesting.
Like a come and help and save me kind of like it was almost like a sign of the cross.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
But it was like a so you'll see a lot of iconography and statues in ancient religion that have the fingers crossed like that.
Like a physical prayer sort of thing.
That's right. That's kind of what it was. And then there's also like fingers crossed behind your back.
When you're saying a thing.
When you're saying a thing that you maybe know isn't true, you're suspicious, isn't it?
Or maybe later it will become not true.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So I liked the layers, and I liked the it not being necessary to commit to one of those.
Yeah.
Like, am I saying, I don't know, I'm going to take a jump and I think I'm jumping into total darkness and I'm just kind of hoping for the best? Am I saying, God, help and save me? Or am I saying, like,
I didn't mean
I don't know if any of this is really true?
Yeah,
like,
the answer is yes.
I didn't really know, and so that seemed like an increasingly good image for that moment, and that record was like, because then it's like you can kind of pick which one depending on the day.
You're almost done the Fingers Crossed tour now.
It's almost over, yeah. I mean,
this is not the last weekend, but
it's the
almost.
second to last weekend that we're seeing each other, and I'm going to have this weekend up here on the East Coast, and then I'm in a few weeks I've got one more run of shows over in the Pacific Northwest, Portland, and Seattle, and Eugene, and then I'm actually doing one last show in my hometown in Nashville.
That seems like a good place to.
I'm going to do one last show, and I'm going to take about a month off and then do one more show.
Okay.
So in November I'm going to do the one and only full band performance of the album with a couple of friends of mine at a friend of mine's studio, and we're going to just sell a few tickets and play just kind of to kind of celebrate one last
capstone
performance. A little bit, because with this record I have a really strong feeling that I will probably not perform it like this again once I'm finished.
Really?
I mean, I've performed the record all the way through top to bottom like maybe 60 or 70 times this year.
Yeah.
And I just have the feeling, because I'm working on a new record now.
Yes.
And that'll be out like early next year sometime. And the energy is already so different, and the moment that I'm in is already so different.
Yeah.
And so while I'm really proud of the new Fingers Crossed, and it was cathartic, and I'm glad to have pushed through it, and I'm glad it's out there. I think this year of touring it and playing the whole record every night was like really processed it all, and I'm kind of feeling like I'm ready to kind of be done with it. I'll hang on to some of the songs and keep playing them in my sets probably, but I don't think I'll ever perform it like this again.
Right.
So these are really the last 2 weekends, and then Nashville will be the last time I do it. And maybe the last time I ever play some of the songs.
Yeah, because some of these songs are very localized. Like one.
That's right.
What do you want to say? Like a single strong emotion that if you were to carry that forever.
That's true. They belong in a moment. They belong in a moment. And not all songs are like that, and some are.
Yeah.
And I'm curious that some of these are. I'll have to wait till I get past it and have some newer songs to play where I have choices.
Yes.
It'll be interesting to see how many of them find their way into the set list.
And how many of them you say goodbye for now. Too.
Exactly. Well played.
Oh my God.
But because there will be some that I'll, and that's kind of true on every record. There's like some songs that just don't go with me. They just kind of stay in those moments. Yeah. And then there's some that absolutely do. I still play songs off my first record. I still play Caedmon songs, for God's sake. So you just never know. You never know.
Yeah.
But it'd be interesting to see.
So what's the new album like? You've talked about it at a few shows. It's got a different feel, unlike all your other albums.
I know, they really are. They are. That is the one consistent thing between all my records, is the total inconsistency.
Yeah.
But the new record's called Targets.
Nice.
And it is absolutely the opposite of Fingers Crossed. It's kind of the opposite of Fingers Crossed in every way. It's kind of gone on to become like its sibling, its opposite, because it's like the yin yang a little bit.
Okay.
Because it's like a punk rock record, loud and fast.
High energy.
Very high energy, very kind of celebratory.
Good.
So it has a very
nice
positive,
shift.
forward energy to it.
Okay.
It is basically Targets has wound up being about, and I didn't know it was going to be this until even just the more recent months. I had a sense of where it was going, and I was already had a handful of songs written, but it's Targets is about finding again all the things that I lost on Fingers Crossed. Oh. So it's like Fingers Crossed was, I said right after I wrote it, that it felt to me like a tale of two divorces.
Yep.
It was kind of vertical, horizontal. I was kind of processing the loss of a lot of things over the last 4 or 5 years. And Targets feels like not finding God again, but finding myself, finding my identity on the other side of all that, more firmly and more confidently, and about finding love again where love was lost and things like that. So it's like, it's really about finding a lot of things and moving forward as opposed to like looking back at and processing the grief of lost things.
Yeah, because you can't grieve that forever.
No, you can't, and you don't want to miss it, but you don't. It's not a thing. It's not a place you want to stay.
You don't sit there.
Yeah,
so
it is interesting.
Yeah,
and so for that reason, I'm really anxious to get it finished and get it out in the world, because right now the newest advertisement for my personal energy is Fingers Crossed.
And that's probably not describing where you are now.
Not even remotely, but I'm still close enough to it, like for instance tonight, here in Buffalo, New York, to be able to perform the record. I can totally do it, it's no problem.
Right.
Because
you can still tap into that.
I can. Because I remember it enough, like I'm familiar enough still with those feelings.
Yeah.
But it's more like still smelling the scent in the air, but the thing itself is gone.
Yeah.
But I'm super anxious to get performing the new songs.
I bet.
And just kind of get on the public record with a little more updated intel.
Yeah, no kidding.
It's that sort of thing.
Yeah. It's interesting. Me and Ruth started. We met in Bible college in 2001.
Oh, and where was that?
This was up in Peterborough, Ontario.
Okay, right.
So our little place, it was like this little evangelical place with 47 students, and that was the biggest year they ever had.
Whoa! My gosh,
it was pretty small.
Incredible.
And then you came out with your first solo album in our second year, and the student body loved it.
Oh,
they loved it because
I can't imagine.
Because there was this, like, we really resonated with this. What do you want to call it? Like a rigorous practical theology.
Yes.
And it was like, we're not on this Christian journey for our health. This is everything, right? So like we would be having discussions that were really resonating with the stuff that you're talking about in Shema Sinchel, like with the consumerization of spirituality. Prayer of Jabez was on our hit list, of course.
Wow, that's crazy.
And songs like Beloved were hitting us because we were really saying, this thing that we're doing, this religious thing, the reward is Christ.
Yep.
And the author is Christ, and the sustainer is Christ, and absolutely everything is this, and the sanctifying becoming like that, and then so my thought is that when that disappears, that really does leave a huge, they talk about the God-shaped hole.
Yes.
But I kind of get the impression only somebody who had something like that in their life could have a God-shaped hole, because when that disappears, it's fingers crossed.
It's kind of the God-shaped chasm, or when a meteor hits and leaves a giant
and there's a huge
indention in the earth that was not there before the impact.
And of course, at the moment of impact, you have all the fallout from the dust. You don't even know, why is it so dark and cold and terrifying?
Right.
Oh, we got destroyed. That's why. So
that's fascinating.
Yeah. So that's where
that's crazy. That's crazy that. That our journeys have been running together that long.
Yeah.
And that music found its way to you somehow, because that's very far from where I live, or far from where I
guess it is.
Was pushing the music out from, which would have been down in the American South.
Yeah. Well, I think evangelicalism anywhere is influenced by the American South for sure. And one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you, because as somebody who used to be a believer. And I mean, there's Christians and there's Christians where it's like, sometimes, you really, really want to nail this thing.
Yes.
You want the idea of being gripped by the goal of, to know him and his suffering and to count everything as loss, which is, so that language, you provided a spiritual vocabulary during those days for sure. And as time goes on, I guess one of the questions I had for you, because I'm kind of doing I don't know if you know, a year of living Christianly. Despite being outside of the church it's been 5 years now since my faith all went kaput.
Okay.
And I'm just like, I wonder if I should go back and try this path out.
That's interesting.
Not try to believe again, because I don't think you can choose what to believe, and I think it's even a little bit dangerous to try to choose to believe something. But is there anything in these structures, in this scaffolding, that's useful? Right?
And the practice.
Yeah, the practice of it, perhaps the discipline. I still don't know the answer to that.
Dude, that's fascinating.
As you look back at your spiritual, I guess, vocabulary and things that were very gripping for you, do you see any remnants, like any lingering sort of, this was a useful thing,
right,
or this screwed me up?
Right.
Is there anything?
So I think that some of the work that I've naturally been doing in the course of my, there's so many words for this sort of thing, but I mean, the word deconstruction is one that we use a lot. And so over the course of that, I think it took me a while to realize that there were things, that it wasn't so much me trying to figure out what to bring with me, so much as saying there were some ideas and some instincts whose meaning I assigned to something that maybe could never bear the weight of those things. And so an example would be my instinct to not return violence with violence.
Okay.
Like I've studied, even having spent most of my time in more theologically conservative denominations like the PCA and I did years of study on pacifism and on nonviolent theology, like Mennonites, John Yoder, Hauerwas, all the Duke Divinity people. Like I found my way into John Roth. There's just a bunch of folks, and so I studied that and really fell in love with that idea. Yeah. Mostly just because I'm just, my natural wiring is that I'm really contrary. I'm very comfortably and naturally contrary. Like I'm very comfortable asking questions like that, and I even prefer, like, if everyone likes something, it's my instinct to question why, and probably to not like it, even if I do.
Even if it's a good answer.
even if I do. And I've really loved that idea. I also, and mostly for the same reason that Martin Luther King, what he said about it that I really liked was that he didn't pursue the path of nonviolence in his protests or struggles or work because he thought it was especially, well, ultimately he did find it to be moral, but objectively, externally moral. But really the reason that the way he taught it and the reason that he clung to it the way that he did was because he just saw that it worked. It just practically worked. He could just see how it worked in families, and he could see how it worked like in all these different ways. Scale, he just knew that it was going to work. And because it sets people off their game a little bit. Like when someone's trying to attack you and you hug and kiss them,
they don't know how to.
They're
no
completely confused.
Now what do I do?
And it's like what, I forget who. Maybe it was John Roth, but it was like kind of an unforeseen third way. That's not like it's my life or your life kind of situation. It's like, no, there are creative third ways that things can happen, and that just takes creativity, it takes intention, sometimes it takes premeditation to be ready for those moments, to think creatively your way out of a conflict. And so that's an idea. The idea of like the importance of caring for the poor. And even just the rolling momentum of the tide rising below all of us to the benefit of all of us. That idea, I mean, there's, I could go really broad here and say something like monogamy, which not all of my friends, not even most of my friends necessarily ascribe to on the other side of their deconstruction from the Christian faith. But I'm assigning new meaning to some of these ideas. But the point being that, like, I think where I've landed with all this is, well, a few things. One is, I can sum all that up by saying that that God doesn't get everything in the divorce. That's the first thing. So I get to pick and choose the things that are valuable and that work and that seem good, and I get to repurpose those things and bring them with me. They never really belong to something. I just misassigned their meaning to something.
Right.
I mean, maybe, in my opinion.
Yeah, certainly, because it's not like you have to take the whole counsel of Scripture. On the other side, it's like I can quite easily take whatever gems I can. And things that were true before the Bible was penned. Yeah.
And things that were true, like things that are self-evident, things that are, like no one. There were some things that it didn't take the Bible to articulate and proclaim. Like we knew they were true before that.
Yeah.
And it's just like an example for our theological friends would be the way that a lot of people say, if you're the way that we came up with theology, and if you're more in the Reform camp, that like John Calvin or Martin Luther, I guess, didn't invent the more Calvinistic ideas of predestination.
Right.
Those things were already thoroughly present all over the whole counsel of the Bible. He's just the one who systematized it and organized it.
In the way that we kept it.
And organized it and made it make sense in a way that we could study it and understand it. But he didn't invent it, he just re-articulated it maybe in a way that was memorable. And I think in the same way, I think there were a lot of things that came far before Christianity did, and that were, and so I think it's like that's more the process, is discovering what of all the things are those things.
Yes.
But the other thing for me, the part of the process has been where I am at this point is I'm kind of liking and trying on the idea that maybe my hypothesis right now anyway, is that maybe there's no external inherent meaning in anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There is only assigned meaning.
Yes.
That nothing really means anything.
I mean,
that there's really, everything is really random and kind of meaningless.
Until a human brain comes.
Until it's not.
Yeah.
Until you assign some meaning to it, and then it could mean everything.
Yes.
To you.
Yeah.
Or to someone, or to a group.
Which I don't think is the same as saying everything is subjective either, because we can have groups coming together and agreeing that this thing means everything. It's kind of like the third way that you're saying, it's not objective or subjective, it's like transjective.
Maybe.
I heard somebody say once.
Right, wow, I like that a lot. And it's like, so for me there are things that are deeply meaningful. I would not try to impress their meaning on other people.
Right.
And I acknowledge that the meaning I find in those things is not inherent but assigned by me.
Yeah. Which keeps them safe.
Which does, but it also, they don't feel fundamentally any different to me, to my experience, than my interactions with and my leaning my weight on things that I before thought were objectively meaningful, inherently, externally meaningful.
Yeah.
The truths of the Bible or whatever else.
Yeah.
The things I lean my weight on feel almost precisely the same to me.
The same sort of a confidence and a knowledge of them working with them.
It doesn't feel any different to me.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a lot of what it is like just figuring out where I want to place meaning. Assign meaning.
Yeah. So one of the big things, I guess, about Reformed Christianity is also spiritual disciplines. There is a practice of piety, right? And like for me, I'd think about stuff that was important to me in the past, things like communion, the Lord's Supper, prayer,
the liturgy,
Bible study, theological wrestlings, which I remember finding very powerful in my early 20s. And then now in this year, I'm trying to just do them, act them, and it's not the same.
And
it's triggering in
weird ways. See if there's any benefit to you just the going through the.
Yeah, I mean, we're after your deconstruction, is the spiritual disciplines. Is that something that you're done with?
It's a good question. I mean, I think maybe all of the conventional ones, unique to my Christian belief. Yes, which is to say, I don't pray.
Yeah.
I don't. Now I do regularly gather with friends,
like-minded friends, and fellowship, and have bread and wine.
Yes, and share meals and so there are some of those things that I find comforting, and I do liturgically, so to speak, habitually, regularly.
That's the chief meeting of the church, according to my denomination.
Yeah. And so there are some things like that, but I have not yet replaced many of those things with anything. Like I have a lot of friends who maybe replace their prayer life with something more meditative. Now, and I also have a lot of Christian friends who are very meditative.
Yeah.
And I know that I mean, Christianity at its core is a mystic religion, and there's a lot of mystic kind of meditation to it, and I that was never part of my experience of it.
Okay.
But that is that I know that to be a huge part of a lot of my friends' experience of it.
Yeah.
So I don't discount that at all. Christian meditation I know is a huge thing. But I have not as of yet replaced much of that with anything. I was never part of a community where there was a really heavy emphasis put on those practices. The last denomination I was in was Anglican, which is highly liturgical. What I responded to about that was that there was something transcendent and the idea that like it was like what the Presbyterians talk about too, in like the gathering of the saints and
the community
saints
coming together to worship.
Yeah, and following the same trajectory of the church calendar, and like we were doing the same readings and same prayers as every other church in the world that was following the church calendar as well. And there seemed like there was something big and weighty about that to me, and dense that I liked. And I think because the way my personality is, and I'm naturally kind of leaning forward leaning and progressive.
Yep.
I liked that the liturgy seemed the opposite. It seemed to balance me a little bit because it was it felt historical and historically dense and rooted in a way, and not just like, oh, this week we decided we're going to have like 2 hours of abstract dancing.
Right.
And then someone is going to whistle, and then we're going to leave.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, but it's like there was not this emphasis on worship music.
Yep.
That was kept very much in line. There was not this emphasis on personality of
the preacher, the charismatic.
That's right, the preacher. He wasn't choosing his text. He wasn't choosing topical series. He wasn't playing to his strengths as an orator or whatever.
Right.
He was just kind of stuck in it like the rest of us.
Yeah.
And something about that felt safe and felt untampered with or untamperable. Like no one could kind of screw with it too much, because it was like, no, this is like, so when
a harder thing to pull from the roots.
That's right. It was like more rooted in something.
Yeah.
And it felt to me more like when moments that felt like provision or serendipity, as it's a word I like a lot nowadays, then it seemed more significant to me, because I knew there was no tinkering.
Right.
Like when there would be a particular week right after a particular thing had happened in the world or in our community the previous week, and then this week there happens to be this reading and this thing that we're going to read, and then this prayer and that responsive thing, and then that sermon. It's like, okay, well that's fucking
on its
crazy.
own.
Yeah. I mean, it just seemed,
like the preacher didn't engineer that because he thought, I know this will get a real good emotional reaction, then can do more.
That's right. Oh, I got a sermon for that.
Yeah.
But it's like, it felt more like, that seems meaningful and significant, and like it's evidence of something that's real behind the scenes here that I really desperately am hoping is and am looking for.
Yeah.
And it felt like it was like held the space for the opportunities to see that more.
Right.
And because it was just a thing that we were locked into from the beginning.
Thousands of years ago,
yeah.
really.
So I was into that. I liked that.
Yeah.
And I'm a very like ritualistic type.
Yeah.
Like there's certain things about my days that happen precisely the same way every single day, and I'm very comforted by that. So I'm wired that way anyway.
Yeah.
And yet, remarkably, a lot of those things have not found replacements. I mean, not yet.
Yeah.
So.
Because you said a few years ago something to the effect of some of the songs that you sing, you don't necessarily believe them, which is probably certainly true now, but there's something that you kind of aspire to believe, that you wish to believe, which, do you still feel that way about some of these things? Maybe.
I mean, and that's true. I remember saying that, like, because I think I was probably, I think the root of that comment at some point from me probably came from talking about like creeds.
Okay, yes.
And confessions.
Yes.
And then went on to be about my songs, my own songs that I'm writing over the years, and that I at one time liked to refer to as like my own personal liturgy.
Yes.
Like the thing that I'm bound to confess, that I don't walk in believing, but I walk in wishing to believe. And that's like And there is that really heavily aspirational element of like creeds and hymns, and is like we don't come in believing the contents of the Apostles' Creed or Nicene Creed most weeks.
No,
but that's why we come.
Yes. And
we come wishing to believe, and therefore we confess it again.
Yeah.
We don't confess it because we believe it.
Right.
We confess it because we wish to believe it.
Yes.
And it's all very highly aspirational.
And we believe that we, in some way, ought to believe.
Yes.
Which is kind of like the Lord, I believe, help my unbelief.
Help my unbelief. And so I think that so I started to kind of think about my songs, like the idea that I'm stuck with the songs that I've written over the years.
No matter how far you've changed.
That's right. These are just, when I go to do a performance as an artist, these are the songs I must choose from.
Yes.
And I can choose, I mean, like tours like I'm doing now, I'm playing this whole record, but on a normal and average night of performance, you can pick and choose, and you can make a set list or you can not, and you can just choose as you go, or you can do it however you want. The point is, you are curating together a statement of a lot of songs you've not written lately, to say something that you have felt lately or feel even maybe tonight.
Yeah.
And so you're putting them together to say something. And I remember thinking, like, this feels like I am reciting my own personal liturgy. Like, I don't believe the contents of these songs, but I wish to, and so I'll sing them again. I show up every night to sing these songs in hopes that I believe the contents of them. And while I do still play some of those early songs, as I'm playing them, I'm still looking for meaning in them, the same way that I used to.
Yeah.
But I'm finding different kinds of meaning, and I know that on this tour I take a break to do requests midway through every night, and play, and that's when I play songs I'm not planning on playing, and I'm often surprised by what gets called out, and it never ceases to amaze me that songs that were written 5, 10, 15 years ago, as I play them, I will hear things that I will be like, oh my God, how in the world 15 years ago could I have known I was going to stand here tonight in 2018 and sing it, and I was going to see that, and it was going to, like, in light of, like, and again, not inherent, but assigned meaning. I will say, like, that is surprising and new, and not a thing I saw coming, and yet a thing I wrote, and that will happen. And so it's not exactly the same. It's not exactly the same thing as being, like, as aspirationally wishing to believe what's in those songs.
Right.
But it is looking for meaning and assigning meaning and not being afraid of finding meaning.
Yes, not resisting necessarily, because I think that for a lot of people who have gone through deconstruction, there is, when we look back at the religion, sometimes we just react like, there was nothing good there. It was all horrible. It was all bad. And then we just, I think we do risk losing something if we're just going to burn it all.
Right. Yeah. Well, because I think when you do that, depending on someone's view of the experience that they just came through, and how much of it was literally drunkenness, and like how much of it was just like, oh my, I was just in a crazy insanity fog for 30 years, or how much of it was, in the way that I'm more coming to see my own experience with it, how much of it's like, oh, no, I think that what I would call the voice of the Spirit for many years, which I did feel as though I had a connection to and was listening for and was acting in accordance with many times and depending upon, was the voice of my own intuition. It was the voice of my body. It was my own gut, because in the last 5 years, on the other side of deconversion for me, I still interact with and experience and hear that voice precisely the same way. The same. It's exactly the same thing, and it shows up and tells me what I need to know. It helps me to find the words I need, and it's like I don't have any second thought about that being the Spirit. I'm like, no, that's always sounded like my voice to me, and so why would I burn that? Like, why would I burn 30 years of getting to know my own body and intuition, as the church was telling me to lean not on my own understanding? Learning that, oh, you know what? I'm not as out, because at first you think, oh my God, now I have to learn how to, first of all, figure out what to do with all those moments where I thought I was hearing the voice of God. Now, how do I categorize what do I do? How do I explain that to myself, first of all? Second of all, how do I learn how to get in touch with the voice of my own body and my own intuition and my gut and all the things that the church, more often than not, tells people not to listen to or fear. But then I realized after a while, I was like, oh, actually, I'm way up further in the line than I thought I was, because I actually have 30 great years of practice listening to that voice.
Yeah.
It's the same voice I've always listened to, and it sounds the same to me today. And I literally, there was never even a bump in the road of my interaction with that voice. And so for that reason, it's like there might be a lot of things like that.
Yeah.
That like someone's particular drive or vision for the poor.
Yes.
That they think, well, that was just all part of that. That was why I was motivated. That was what that was, and they just want to scrap it all. It's like, no, actually, like, don't lose some of that, because, like, in other words, don't give all that. Like, there is no trademark symbol after some of your best qualities.
Yeah, no more charity now.
Those don't belong to the idea of God necessarily. Yeah. Those are things that may be inherent in your character, that are great things, that you just naturally took to and behaved out of, and you need to bring with you and celebrate, and don't consider those, detach those things from motivations that you now maybe don't relate to or identify with, and realize that they were your motivations all along, because you're a human being who's wired to do these things and love these things, and that's a great thing, and continue on. Take them and keep moving. Don't
give Christianity everything in the divorce.
Yeah, don't give God everything in divorce. I mean, that's kind of the idea. Yeah.
Do you think that the practice of that kind of spirituality helped to develop those, I guess I would want to call them powers of introspection or intuition, because I think that especially Reformed spirituality is very what's the word for inside? It's an introspective thing. It's always soul searching, looking for little nuggets of sin that you can kind of sacrifice. And I mean, for me, the thing that I was really gripped by as a Christian was the idea of sanctification, of healing whatever is dead and broken in myself. So, I mean, sin, of course, is it's a problematic sort of a concept, but it seems to also have use in little doses. And I wonder if the practice of that, does that help introspection?
I think it must, right? Because I'm very...
we're doing something,
because I am still very aware, just as aware, of all of the things in my character and my personality and in my story that I wish to be free of, that I think I'd be a better man without. And that I want to have command over, and I don't want to be a slave to, and don't want to be commanded by, and like all those same things. So it's like I'm still very much in that. I'm still absolutely and increasingly aware, wanting to be aware of things that I don't want to bring with me into my future. That are not in line of sight to the man who I wish to be in the world in which I want to live, and things like that. So, but I think my 20 or 30 years of evangelical Christianity, I think were probably a very good sandbox for me to learn the practice of introspection, as you say, and even just gave me a grid to understand something earlier than maybe I would have come to it. To understand there are things about how I'm wired and how I'm made and who I am and my experience that I've had that I don't have to bring with me. That I don't have to, that those things don't have to be true about me. Like you can overcome those things, and you can do battle with those things, and you can purge those things, and you can defeat those things, and you can, and I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the biggest powers in all religion or spiritual paths, really, the idea that you can change yourself.
That's right. And so I think I would had to have learned a lot, and only benefited from all the years that I spent working on those things. Now, what's fascinating is, in the last half a decade or so, has been that some of those specific things that had been lingering, to use Paul's words, thorns for me.
Thorn on my side.
Things over which I could never seem to get permanent victory or whatever. That on the other side of deconversion and deconstruction, for me personally, I have found many of those things almost immediately disappear.
Interesting.
And the reason is because my motivation for wanting to purge them or be free of them was no longer external, it was internal. So it's like I didn't want, I was able to look practically at certain behaviors or certain patterns or certain things and say, you know what, this just is not healthy.
Yeah,
it's just
I don't want this to be me.
I'm not saying it's moral or immoral. I don't think I'm in any position to make a judgment even about that. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm not saying it's wrong to do any of these things. Yeah. I'm just saying I don't like it for me.
Yeah.
I just find it to be unhealthy for me. I don't like the way that it causes me to behave in these ways, and I don't like those behaviors, and I don't want to be like that. That's not the man I want to be.
And that recategorization was
for
a
whatever
powerful
reason,
thing.
for whatever reason, suddenly it was about my own health, and it was my motivations were internal rather than external.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, there are things that just, without even a thought, things that were a constant struggle before, in the first few months of settling into a place of kind of on the other side of deconstruction, I just found just weren't even interesting or even a second thought anymore.
Wow.
Things I haven't thought about in years.
Yeah, that you thought you'd never.
Decades feeling like I would probably never be free of in my life. Or just, I can't even imagine being preoccupied with anymore.
Wow, yeah.
And it's only because I'm like, that just doesn't make any sense. I just don't, like, here's all the practical reasons why I don't like it for me.
Yeah.
And I don't want to behave that way. And so I just don't want to do it. And I genuinely lost my taste for a lot of things.
Wow, even though in the years previous, you had been like kind of doing the holy war against it.
Absolutely.
And see, it's interesting because, I mean, songs like some of the really old songs of yours, like, Thankful, one of the most important lines is, you ran across a bag of letters and nothing's changed, the same old struggles. And I was thinking to myself, in the 5 years of my deconstruction, there's a truth there. There are these huge monolithic battles that it's like, well, I guess I'm going to struggle with this my whole life. And then you just, one big change, and it's like, oh, I haven't thought about those for ages. That's not a problem anymore.
I know. And I'm also not saying that can't happen in the context of Christian practice.
And we've heard awesome stories of people,
because I'm sure it can. I'm
Yeah.
sure it can. And I'm also not saying that folks who are practicing evangelical Christianity couldn't have those same types of inward personal health-related motivations layered on top of their objective moral motivations for not doing or doing any particular thing.
Yeah.
I'm sure they could.
Yeah.
I can only kind of really tell my experience of this.
Of course.
And in my experience, it's just been really fascinating.
Wow.
And it's been a much more permanent and persuasive thing for my personality to just kind of occasionally inventory all my behaviors and say, which of these are in line with the man that I wish to be and which aren't?
Yeah.
Which of these seem healthy and which don't?
Yeah.
And amazingly, those are the things that just naturally purge.
Just because you're able to find your own sort of, when you look at the things that are not part of the man that you want to be, do you judge that with your own sort of intuitive, that spirit voice?
I do. Yeah. I mean, like things that seem healthy for me and also seem to benefit the people in my life.
Yeah.
And seem to add water to the tide below my whole community.
Yeah.
To where we would all rise to lift it up. And I mean, I'm using the same intuition and intellectual faculties and emotions that I used to discern how I felt about any particular scripture. And a lot of my Christian friends would say, "Oh, but that you're just floating out on the water. You're just floating. You could be blown by any random wind now because you're just trusting your emotions." Now I'm like, right. But here's the thing: is all the same faculties that I used and that you use in order to determine how you feel, your resolve about choices you make about what you believe about, what counsel you will receive regarding things of spirituality and things of objective scripture and whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah.
I'm using all those same faculties.
Yeah.
I mean, like in other words, no human can possibly bypass the grid, the processing layer of their own intellectual power, their emotions, the
whole cognitive machinery.
That's exactly the cognitive machinery. That is the same thing that is leading you to your conclusions. It's leading me to mine. So you can't claim the intellectual high ground because you feel as though you are tapped into something objective.
Yeah, some higher God wisdom, because it's whatever source you're getting it from, it's filtering through.
You are still deciding about it.
Yeah.
Like, and even the faith responding to the grace is still an act of cognitive response.
Yes. Yeah.
And
even if it feels like it's an unwilling.
And I'm doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And that's the reason that. So I think I'm just like preempting a little bit the voice in my head of the ex-evangelical who would say, Well, but now you get to decide anything, and
now you can just sin all you want.
Well, and that's right. But which amazingly, I sin so much less. I genuinely, really am so much. I'm such a better moral person by a long shot than I was, and more so than a lot of my evangelical friends who share their struggles with me. Not that there's any score to that in the least, but they would say, well, but you're just being blown by the wind because you have no compass. You have no, because the Bible, which is this rooted, true. I'm like,
rock.
But you're deciding that it's rooted and true.
Yes.
And it's because it says that about itself, and you're choosing to believe that by way of your intellect and your cognitive machinery and your emotions and all those same things that I'm deciding this with.
It's the same foundation.
So stop trying to pretend that we're on a different level. In terms of the choices that we're making to bring us to these conclusions. Because we're not.
Because we're all standing in. I remember there was a RC Sproul.
Who I was a huge fan of, and I met.
You met him?
I met and have a hysterical story of almost accidentally killing him once.
I want to hear this.
I will tell it to you, but after you tell me.
Okay, so his little quote was, he's given this lecture, he's like, the secular humanist has his feet firmly planted in midair.
Yes.
And at the time I was like, yeah, it sounds true. But then on the other side of deconstruction, it says, well, that's all of us.
Right.
But the humanist is the guy who says, no, I know that my foot...
But at least acknowledges that we're all in free fall.
Fingers crossed.
And maybe the ground's coming, but maybe it's not.
Yeah.
And maybe the point is to get comfortable and situated in the free fall.
With the fall.
If you think that your feet are planted firmly on the rock, that's only because you've decided that that's where your feet are planted.
Yeah.
And the rock is the rock because it says it is, and you're choosing to believe that.
Yeah.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
And you know what?
It could work.
And not only could it work, it could be true.
Yeah.
I can't say that it's not.
That's true.
Because I don't claim any evidence.
Right. Because all we are doing is seeing.
But neither do the Christians have any real evidence.
Right.
I mean, to my experience, other than your story...
That's it.
There isn't really any evidence that all of these... There's no evidence on either side. It's really hard to argue with evidence.
Yes.
You know, I mean, it's a convenient part of the story that, that many of the significant characters, Jesus being the main one, bodily ascended. So there is no body. There is no, it's like we think maybe there's the tomb and it was empty, and isn't that amazing? But maybe there was never anybody in it in the first place, or maybe it's not the right place, or maybe, there are parts of the Bible that are accurate historically.
Sure.
But so is the historical teachings of Jerome or a lot of other people.
Right. We can't take that into
and that doesn't make those things inspired and inerrant.
Right.
It just means that they were anchored in some history of the day.
Yeah.
Just because some of it's true doesn't mean all of it is.
Certainly. But it's one of those weird things that you can't have. Apologetics is like the weirdest branch of Christian learning, because it's just, it's certainly no one in the Bible engaged in that, as far as I can tell.
Well, and it's just a little bit, I have found it to be a little bit cyclical.
Yes.
It's a little bit of a feedback loop, because when I talk to my friends about it now, and I'm not even trying, because I don't have a dog in the fight, I'm not even trying to be, I don't want to be adversarial.
We don't want to ruin anyone else's faith.
I really don't, genuinely.
It could be working well for them.
And it could be true.
Yeah.
I'm genuinely not ruling out that it could be. I don't think that necessarily I'm right.
Right.
I don't have any evidence that I'm right or wrong, and they don't have any evidence that they are either. They say that they do. I've certainly heard those cases, but for those people, like, they will try to get me with their apologetics.
Yeah.
And the whole time I'm like, right, but in order for me to believe that, I would have to pre-believe that this thing is true, and that's the thing I'm leaning on. But it's like faith before faith. It's like you have to take a leap of faith that precedes the leap of faith.
Yes.
And it becomes this circle of logic to me that doesn't really make any. I can't make sense of it. It's like you just kind of, and they'll say, well, you just have to eventually. There's a point at which you just have to have faith and just take a leap. I'm like, cool.
I get that part.
I just guess I don't.
Yeah.
I guess I just don't choose to do that, because I honestly see just as much explanation for how all this is this way, and how a lot of this stuff got this way, and why a lot of things are the way they are. I don't need this as an explanation for reality to make it all make sense.
The naturalistic explanation works.
The natural explanation works,
really
and the simplest
works.
explanation tends to be the right one, and as opposed to the one that requires many miracles.
Yes.
And is designed after
convoluted arguments.
And is designed after world religions that were preceded by thousands of years to Christianity. complete with triune gods and perfect lambs that were sacrificed and imputed righteousness.
And strange purity codes that don't work anymore.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that existed long before Christianity. And so I don't know, I just choose not to have faith in that because I see no evidence of it needing to be or being actually true.
Yeah.
It could be, but I don't know. But their argument that it is tends to be
a presuppositional argument.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I think all apologetics are, at their core, presuppositionalist.
Well, I just like they'd have to be.
Yeah. And I mean, the denomination that I'm from, they're big. The only apologetics that works is presupposition, Van Til.
Yes, of course, Van Til.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, it's like, so where I have leaned back and what I have found and really like as a method is the scientific method.
Yeah.
A hypothesis that we test.
Yep.
And at the point at which there is any evidence that is contrary to the hypothesis, then
let it go.
Then we toss it.
Chain back to the lab.
And we come up with a new hypothesis.
And then just follow the breadcrumbs.
That's right.
After that. Yeah.
That's right. Always looking, everything comes in and everything informs the result. It's data.
Yeah.
I mean,
it makes a lot more sense.
Which interestingly feels a lot less like standing on thin air.
Yeah.
And it makes belief in something that requires cyclical faith feel a lot more like that.
Yes, it does.
To me, in the context of this conversation, it feels like, I feel like I'm just looking at the actual information that I can gather.
Because getting out allows a view that you can't have from the inside.
Yes, which is the thing interesting you'd say that, because it's a metaphor I use all the time, that you can't tell yourself or give yourself a completely honest assessment of the boat you're in while you're in it. It's not possible. Because you are in every way incentivized to convince yourself that the boat can hold you while you're in it.
Yeah, no matter what holds you, you're going to want to believe.
Because it would be a crisis. It's what C.S. Lewis talked about when he said, don't ever, like if you're going to go and tear the roof off of someone's belief house, you must stay with them. In other words, don't just do battle with someone and with your apologetics and just convince them that Christianity is true and then leave them, because all you've done is destroy them.
Yeah, you've torn down some system.
You've just destroyed their boat, and now they're going to drown, flail, and go bananas in the ocean.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's the cruelest thing possible.
Yeah.
And so never ever do that. And because he was talking about probably a more winsome and appropriate way to do, I don't know, evangelism or whatever.
Yeah.
But he would say to never ever ever do that, because just to win an argument. Yeah. Because it's literally the cruelest thing you can do.
Yeah. People don't think that, especially when we're engaging in evangelism.
Right.
Because I mean, me and Ruth, we were missionaries and evangelists, and our goal, we were thinking, this is going to be great if I could just convince some people of the truth of Christ.
Or even initially, just four spiritual laws, and just convince them. It's like what youth camps do at the end of night too.
Yeah.
And they want to leave kids there for a 24 hours or so, that they come back and they're desperate, and you can really make the sale. But it's like where you just convince people that there is this chasm that is because of your sin, that you are not cool and God's not cool with you.
You are in the most crisis sort of point imaginable.
Like that part of the four spiritual laws is actually putting someone in that crisis.
Yes.
And I'm not saying it's not persuasive.
It can be very persuasive.
In closing the deal and making converts. But it's really cruel. It's a cruel thing
and dangerous, because you can
to
really
persuade
mess
someone
up.
of that. That's right. And so it's never a thing that I would wish to do with my Christian friend, with my Christian friends, is to somehow persuade them out of their Christianity. But it feels to me, back to what we were saying before about the feet in the air, feet on the rock, and working by the scientific method, the testing of hypotheses, the gathering of actual discernible data and information and things we can observe and document.
And test again.
That's right. Feels to me like, I mean, they would say, well, that's just ignoring that they're somehow enlightened and what about all these other things that can't be seen or tested or whatever.
But it's love or whatever.
Which, you know what, to be fair, that's true. I mean, it is. It's like all you can do is continue to look at the evidence of it.
Yep.
And it's like dark matter.
Yep.
It's like you can, or dark energy rather.
Yeah.
It's like, it's an idea that it shows the way that it behaves is as though there is something there. We see the energy coming off of something that we can't, that's not there.
Yeah.
So we have to presume maybe there is something
there.
There is something in dark matter, dark energy. There is something there, but only because we see the evidence of something reflecting the energy reflection off.
Right.
But we can't see or find the thing itself.
Yeah.
But we have to maybe believe there's something there. That's what love is.
Yeah.
Love
And we
is like,
have evidence for that too. We have
yeah.
evidence for love.
Yeah. But, and yet, show it to me.
Right.
Right. So it's not that I don't believe in things unseen, but it's just interesting that when you start to talk about belief in this way and, faith versus hypotheses versus whatever else, how quickly it does start to feel like really that narrative is flipped the wrong way. The burden of proof is the wrong direction.
Certainly.
Because it's like, I'm not asking you to take any leaps. I'm just asking you to look at all this stuff with me and let's discern.
And let's stop leaping a little.
And let's like start walking and looking and proving and testing, and as opposed to like, I know that everything seems to run contrary to this, but I'm just going to doggedly continue in this. Yeah. Even though hard as a lot of my more progressive and especially a lot of my Catholic friends work to make Christianity, tolerant and make it open, it's an extremely exclusive religion. Yeah. There is only one way to the Father, and that's through me, said Jesus. Yeah. So as hard as great progressive popes and great progressive teachers and evangelical teachers and Rob Bells and people like that try to make it all, but we're all welcome, and really there's many ways and many. It's like, well, I like that idea. Just let's call it something else. Yeah. Because that's for sure not what Jesus said.
Yeah, that's for sure not what.
So you're for sure at odds with Jesus of the Bible. Now I know that a lot of you say, well, but we're going to like kind of toss the whole Bible. We're just going to be Jesus people. I'm like, well, okay.
I don't know what you mean.
A few of your problems are that Jesus made Christianity extremely exclusive.
Yes.
One way to the Father. Period. Through Him. That's that.
Yep.
So that's most people aren't coming in. Yeah. Most people.
Yeah. The rest of it is the wailing and the gnashing of teeth. That's Jesus, not
mostly.
Paul.
And nobody in the New Testament taught more about hell than Jesus did. Yeah. So it's like, I like where you're trying to go with it, and I like how you've softened it, and I like how you've pried it open for a lot more people. It's just not Christianity anymore.
Just, if you read it, it's like,
So people hear you and they think they like Christianity now. They like your version, but your version's not Orthodox Christianity, and that's cool. I'm not saying I'm not down with that. I'm just saying that gets tricky because Christianity is not a tolerant, open religion. Yeah. It's not.
Yeah. And if it will be, that's going to be a future thing. That's going to be very divorced from what we are.
The experience that we have of it as it's laid out in the Bible. But the thing is, like, I remember at the time kind of being okay with that. I mean, hard as it was to have to be honest about it, it's like, listen, this isn't my fault. Yeah. And I don't know why I get it and some people don't. I go back to Ephesians 2:8-9. I'm not, it had nothing to do with me.
Yep.
But I do, for whatever reason, see this. Yeah. And I wish that I had the luxury of telling you that you could behave in any way that you wish, and you can believe anything that you wish, and that all roads are going to go to the same place. But that's just not what the Bible says. I tell you my story, and I can tell you what I believe it says, and then you're going to have to reckon with that yourself. Yeah. And I can't convince you, but I can pray and things like that. We can all depend on the Spirit. Which interestingly is where I leave it now. And with my Christian friends who try to convince me of this, I say, listen, like, I don't know why you're trying to persuade me. Because your own Bible says
it's a gift.
That it's a gift. It's the work of the Spirit, start to finish. It's a removing of a heart of stone and replacing with a heart of flesh. That is not something you can do for me. Yeah. So if it's true, we're both depending on the Spirit to show up. I'm literally in the grave next to Lazarus, waiting to hear my name. Yeah. And I'm going to lay in there dead till he shows up.
Yeah. Somebody asked me near the beginning of this year living Christianly, well, what would it take for you to believe? What would it take for you to believe in God? Well, that's easy. God would have to give me faith because I can't reach out and grab it.
What it would take is a miracle.
It would take a miracle. Yeah, it would.
What does it take for a dead man to come 6 feet out of the ground? It takes someone to dig him out, to open the box and revive him.
Breathe into his nostrils.
And the Bible makes it very clear that there is nothing less spiritually than that going on in salvation.
Absolute new life.
New life, from death to life. Yeah. And that's what would be required.
Yeah, and I
I'm open to it. I'm literally in the grave waiting to hear my name.
Yeah, anytime.
If that's the picture.
Because if there is going to be a work of the Spirit going on, I want in.
And I won't be able to resist it, and I can't call out for it. I cannot coax him over. Yeah. Either my name is written in the book of life or it's not. Yeah. And I mean, so if we're going to really get into the hard language of the Bible, provocative as it may be, like, I got to a point, I don't like binary ideas or statements, but there's a few that feel emotionally like they are, although maybe they're not. But there's a point where I said, you know what, maybe God made me and fashioned me for destruction.
Yeah, vessel for wrath.
Because he says he does that.
Jacob I have loved, Esau I've hated, for the good pleasure of his own will.
That's right, and he receives no counsel but his own about that. And so there's nothing I'm going to be able to do to change his mind about it. So maybe it's all real and I'm just not chosen. And that's a thing I'm going to have to that's just a thing I'm going to have to reckon with.
Yeah.
And that's not a thing I can really do anything about.
Right, and it would seem unnatural and almost, it would seem shady to try to do something about it in a way, to try to strong arm a faith into oneself.
So I'm going to try to make the best of this.
Yeah.
And I'm listening.
Yeah.
Haven't stopped listening. I mean, in as far as Lazarus was listening the moment before he heard his name out of Jesus' mouth. Yeah. Which a dead man cannot.
Can't.
So he wasn't listening.
No.
He wasn't paying attention.
Yep.
He wasn't flagging someone down. He wasn't wishing or hoping for it.
He wasn't seeking.
Leaning forward. He wasn't seeking it.
No.
He was just suddenly called out.
Yeah.
Came alive and came out, and that was the only response he could have had.
He had no choice.
And because he had no choice. I mean, that's a hard and biblical word.
Yeah.
And
that's the Christianity I resonate with.
Me too. Yeah. And so what's so funny is that all my friends call me like a reformed atheist because when I do pick up the language of Christianity and start to speak it again, it's a language I'm fluent in.
Oh yeah.
Just like you can still have the accent of a country in which you no longer live.
Yeah.
And you can still detect the accent on my speaking, but I go immediately into that Reformed view, only because it's just the one that seemed to make the most logical sense to me.
It was very consistent.
It's the one that seemed like it made the most sense of the whole thing to me.
Yeah.
And so that's still the one I go to. And some of my friends, so what's hysterical is that I will find myself in theological debates with friends arguing a biblical position.
Yep.
Arguing from a Bible that I have no belief in. But I'm just like, I'll argue all the tenets of Reformed theology with them and sometimes win.
Yep.
And then at the end of it, have to say...
That was weird.
And by the way, that was weird because I for sure don't believe any of what either of us have just been talking about.
Oh my God.
So it's weird.
It is weird.
Anyways. Comforting that you understand.
Yeah.
Because not a lot of my friends do. Not a lot of my friends do. Because they're just like... If you're going to talk about Christianity, at least talk about it the way I talk about it, and be cool about it, and be open and be tolerant and be whatever. I'm like,
I don't know.
I've never experienced that version.
It's a weird dialect.
And as you talk about it, I want to start quoting Bible verses to challenge you.
Yeah.
Because like, what do you do with this?
This is no Christianity.
What do you do with this?
Yeah. Actually, I want to ask you about that RC Sproul story real quick though. If it's a quick one, unless it's a long one.
Okay, I'll tell it quick, and then I'm going to go prepare for a show.
Giddy up, yeah.
So the story was that my old band, Caedmon's Call, that I was in for about a decade, early 90s to early 2000s, we were playing a show we were playing at a CBA festival, which is the Christian Booksellers Association, which is a thing that they do these once a year, and artists and authors go to these things to basically market and sell their wares to the retailers and whatever. So all the bands and all the authors and all these people show up and do signings and do stuff on the conference floor and meet and shake hands and do whatever. They do, but you schmooze and try to sell your stuff to people. And so one year, probably in the late 90s, we were doing CBA. We had just played we were finished for the day. We were walking back to our hotel from the conference center, and it's thousands and thousands of people that go to these things. So we're walking back, and as we were walking, it was our drummer, Todd, and somebody else from our band, I forget who, but I know Todd was there, and maybe like somebody from our label, and we were just all walking back to the hotel. And walking towards us I recognize him as RC Sproul, Senior, who I'd read every one of his books.
Oh, of course.
What was the book? The classic of his.
Holiness of God?
No, it was it's the short one that was the book that convinced me of Reformed theology.
Oh, okay.
It was I'll think of it at some point. But anyway, I was a huge fan. Read all of his books.
Oh yeah.
And here he comes. I'm like, and the whole time I'm at these things, I'm looking for guys like that.
Oh yeah.
I was looking for my heroes.
Yes.
And so I see him, and I'm like, guys, there's RC Sproul. And I was freaking out. And we come up to him, and I was like, I got to do it. I got to do it. And I mean, I didn't have as many tattoos as I have today, but I had a lot of tattoos, and I was probably dressed almost just like this.
Yep.
Shaved head, white T-shirt, tattoos. I look like, I don't know what, to a guy like RC Sproul.
Yeah.
we get up to him and I just stop and I say, Dr. Sproul, I don't want to bother you, but I'm such a huge fan. I've read all your books. You've been such a huge influence on me. I would love to just shake your hand and if possible, just snap a quick picture with you. Because my friends aren't going to believe that I got to meet you.
Yeah.
And he was very gracious, and he was like, he was like, really, and he's like, oh, sure, and what's the name of your group? And he'd never heard of us, and so he was very kind, and so the guy from the label, gets, and me and Todd and RC Sproul, and we frame up for this picture, and all of a sudden there is this like clamor. And this thing is happening, and I'm like, what's happening? And I look over, and RC Sproul is like doubled over and like going to a knee, and he's going to the ground. And I look around, I was like, what's happening? And I realized that where we were standing to take our picture was in the entryway of a parking garage, and the arm for the parking thing was up when we walked up, and it came down. And it came down, and actually I right after heard, because the label guy who was about to snap the picture in horror watched this happen. It came down, and it hit him on the head, and then as he tried to get out of the way, it then went down and struck him on his shoulder, and it put him on the ground.
Holy crap.
Like he hit the ground.
Wow.
And the thing came down, and we were like, oh my God. And I was like, I just killed RC Sproul. And I couldn't, it was like, wow. And so we helped him up, and he was like, his assistant was like, he was looking for like blood. He was like, it was traumatic. But you know what, dude? And so I was just flush, and I mean, we were all just like, didn't know what to do. And I swear to God, RC Sproul, he looks over at the guy and he's like, did you at least get the picture? And the guy was like, the guy looked at me and he was like, no. And he was like, well, let's do it. Let's try it again. And I couldn't believe this.
Oh, that's beautiful.
I mean, 60-year-old, some odd. And so we framed up, and I'm sure that I'm just horrified and blushing in this picture. Exactly. I don't know. I got to find this picture. But I did get my picture with RC Sproul, and we walked away, and I just was like, oh my God, like I cannot wait to tell the rest of the band that I could have just almost killed RC Sproul. Like that could have been the headline. Member of fringy Christian band kills theological hero.
Quote, it was all God.
It was, exactly, quote, you know what? I couldn't have saved him, from the foundations of the earth, that thing was going to hit him on the head and kill him that day.
It's like something from the Babylon Bee.
I mean, honestly.
Well, that's awesome.
Pleasure.
All right, thanks a lot, Derek.